Now we get into sums and differences, adding and subtracting numbers, which is like, yeah, that's not a big deal, except for it is a big deal when we start dealing with how do we add, subtract numbers that are both positive and negative. What do I do when I'm subtracting two negative numbers? What do I do when I'm subtracting two positive numbers? What do I do when I subtract a positive number and a negative number, or when I'm adding those two things? And there's all these like weird rules, and then somebody else starts streaming up on my board. All right, so let's go through that, because I'm going to teach you a couple rules here that if you can lock them in, should make your life a little bit easier. All right, so let's start with the rules of addition. And I say this because I think addition is way more important than subtraction, and I'll show you why. If you can learn the rules for addition, subtraction should be no problem, but you got to get addition down first. So when we say real numbers, we're going to find out that you're going to see this a lot. People always go, why do we say real numbers all the time? Because Algebra 2 is where at one point we will get into something called imaginary numbers. And we need to differentiate from those, that this rule applies to the real numbers, the numbers that basically you guys have been dealing with for all time at this point. But at some point, if you were to go back to these notes, you would be like, wait, but that's not true for imaginary numbers. Okay, so this is true for real numbers. If I have two numbers, A and B, I don't care what they are, I'm just going to add two numbers, A and B, together. If A and B are negative numbers, meaning both of them are negative, a negative number plus another negative number, then when I add them together, the answer will always, always, always be negative. 100% of the time. I've got negative plus more negative, then yeah, that's going to end up negative. So I always think of it like this. It's like debt. Like, right, if you owe me $5 and then I add on another $10 you owe me, that's that's more negative than you started off. So negative plus negative, when we're adding them, means more negative. We're adding a whole bunch of negative together. It's a lot of negative. The answer is going to be negative. So how do I actually do that? Well, let's pretend like we've got something like -5 plus -9. Somebody might be like, why do you have parentheses around there? Because actually it makes it a little more understandable than when people see this. They go, why does that say plus -9? Because what we're doing is we're adding -9. All right, so we agree that this is a negative number and this is a negative number, and we're going to add them together. So I always I do this. When I tutor, I go like this. I go, let's just come up with the most natural human way to say this, not the math nerd way to say this. Because I can math nerd on you all day, but then people start losing interest. The one thing I know is that this answer will be negative, guaranteed. So now, if I just lock in the idea that I know my answer is negative, then I can do, now the math speak of it is just take the absolute value of these two numbers, but really just means forget about that they're negative. You already know the answer is negative. Just take 5 plus 9. What's 5 plus 9? It's 14, so it's going to be -14. And that will be true. That rule works every single time you add two negative numbers. So remember, this only works because we are adding two numbers that are both negative. If you have a situation where you're adding two numbers that are both negative, just understand the answer is negative. And if I add up those two numbers, like I forget that they're negative, I just go 9 plus 5, I'll get that negative number. That is true for all negative numbers when you add them. All negative real numbers. Questions so far? Okay, so two negative numbers, when you add them, will always yield another negative number. And just take whatever those two numbers are, add them together. 9 and 5, that's 14, and I know it's negative. All right, so now we've got for real numbers A and B, if A is a positive number and B is a negative number. First of all, let me pause for a second because there's one more situation, but I don't think I need to teach you this number. I don't need to teach you this rule. I feel like I don't need to go over this. If A is a positive number and B is a positive number, I don't need to teach you that rule, right? That's like saying 5 plus 3. You understand that that's going to be a positive number. The same rule applies to negative numbers. It's going to be a negative number. We just add them together. But this is a different situation. This says that one of them is a positive number and one of them is a negative number. So here's the math nerd speak. It says if the absolute value A is greater than the absolute value of B, then A plus B is a positive number. A plus B is equal to, so let's get past all that for a minute. Let's look at these two numbers. So here's how I like to explain it. Let me rewrite that. I don't like that. So the way that this was supposed to look, I don't know if yours turned out that way. I wanted it to look like, on your notes, does it look like this? Yeah. Okay, thank goodness, because that's how I wanted it to look. So I'm going to add a positive number, that's a positive 9, to a negative number. This is not the same situation as last time. So here's how I like to talk about it. There are 9 people on the positive side. There are 5 people on the negative side. Do I have more positive or more negative? I have more positive, so it is a guarantee to me that this answer, when I add them, is going to be positive. If this were a tug of war and everything were equal, there are more positives, they're going to win. This is going to end up, and it's a little slow showing up on the board there, this will end up as a positive number. More positive, it's going to be positive when you add them. More negative, it's going to end up what? Okay, so as long as we know that, that is going to be a huge part. Let's just separate that we know that the answer is positive. Sorry, the screen's just delayed right now. I'm going to pause. So, we've got if A is a positive number and B is a negative number. Now, this is the one I just showed you in that second example. So, in this case, if one is positive and one is negative, and there are more negatives, then the answer will end up negative. So, here, now yours should look better than mine. This is 5 plus negative 9. This is just kind of like the reverse version of what we just saw. I see 5 plus a negative 9. I have more negatives. I know the answer is going to end up negative because there's more negatives than there are positives. And then I look at them and I go, okay, just take 9 minus 5. Now, you might say, why not just take 5 minus 9? Because that's harder to do. And I'm just telling you, always take the big number minus the small number, 9 minus 5. It's way easier to do. I know that's 4. I'll make my life easy. You could switch it around the other way. I wouldn't. It just makes it harder on you. So 5 plus negative 9, that's negative 4. Now, if you can remember these addition rules, that's everything. Because in a minute, I'm going to teach you subtraction, but I hate subtraction more than addition. So I'm going to show you how to turn every single subtraction problem into an addition problem. Every single time. We're just going to be like, nope, not doing subtraction. Let's turn it into addition. So let's take care of a couple of these first. Notice that this is a problem very much like what I would give you. So this is, I expect like quiz time here. This is like something that you could expect to see on your quiz. So I still need to go, like when I confront this and I see it, I go, oh man, I've got order of operations, I've got adding and subtracting here. So let's pause for a minute. Order of operations, when I look at those parentheses, is there anything that needs to be done inside the parentheses? No, it's already taken care of. So I'm going to look for exponents. Anything to be done with exponents? No. Any multiplication or division? No, so I only have my addition and subtraction, and I'm always, 100% of the time, going to do my addition and subtraction from left to right, just like I read. So let's address this, the first part. Negative 14 plus 9. Let's just look at that part first. Is negative 14 plus 9 going to be positive or negative? It's going to be negative. Now, one of them is positive and one of them is negative. So what do I do with those two numbers? Subtract them. 14 minus 9. What's 14 minus 9? So we got negative 5. So we got negative 5 plus negative 12 plus 20 plus negative 8. Our first part is done. We're going to still keep going left to right. Now we've got negative 5 plus negative 12. I'm adding two negative numbers. I expect that answer to be negative. So what do I do with 5 and 12? Add them together. They're both the same, so add them together. 5 and 12 is 17 plus 20 plus a negative 8. Again, still addition and subtraction, still going to work my way left to right. I've got negative 17 plus 20. One of those is negative. One of them is positive. Would I expect that to be positive or negative? It's positive. I have a positive. I have a negative. What should I do with the two numbers? Subtract them. 20 minus 17 is 3. 3 plus negative 8. I've got a positive 3 and a negative 8, and I'm about to add them. Is that answer going to be negative or positive? Negative. And what do I do with the 8 and the 3? I subtract them because they're different. So I subtract them. 8 minus 3 is? And I already knew it was going to be negative. So we're down to negative 5. All of that equals negative 5. But it's real easy to get lost in this unless you have a method. I'm going to work left to right because all I see is addition and subtraction here. There's nothing else. I got rid of all of that. That is the hard part here. These are the questions that are going to get people right now. They're not terribly hard ones, but it's easy to get lost in them. All right, again, if you fall behind on the notes, don't worry. You can always go back to the video. It'll be uploaded today. My slides out of order? Oh, nope, there we go. Okay, so subtraction. So I hate subtraction. I'm not going to lie, I hated it. I will not even lie to you. When I learned it in elementary school, I stunk at it. I was terrible. I was great at addition. I was always great at multiplication. I stunk at division. I stunk at subtraction. For some reason, they stumped me. Maybe you fall in the same boat. So one great thing about subtraction is every single subtraction problem in the world can be turned into an addition problem. So let's say that I had something simple. We all understand that 8 minus 5, we all know the answer to that, right? But I'm going to do a little math magic here. And if you don't like subtraction, you always, especially when it deals with numbers that are tough, you can turn it into addition. So, subtraction means add the opposite. That's the key word there. I'm going to keep saying that, add the opposite. So, instead of subtracting 5, I'm going to take 8 and add the opposite of 5. What's the opposite of 5? Negative 5. Now, we already know what the answer to this is. What is the answer to the first one? 3. So if I'm right here, if I'm right about this theory, then this should turn out to be the same answer. So I've got 8 plus negative 5. Should that answer be positive or negative? One's positive, one's negative. It'll be positive because I have more positives. So they're different. One's positive, one's negative. What am I going to do with the 8 and the 5? I'm going to subtract them. And 8 minus 5 is? Notice that was not a coincidence that they ended up with them. That's because I turned a subtraction problem into addition. Now you might be saying like, that's crazy. I know how to do 8 minus 5. Why would I turn that into addition? You wouldn't. But in some problems, it'll be harder and you might not know what to do. So let's go on to some examples. All right. So let's do a couple more here. These are the subtraction ones. Now, some of you learned it like this. You'll look at A and you'll say, when I see two negatives next to each other, my teacher taught me to go plus plus, or some other thing that they told you to say. That's still true. That's not untrue. When you are subtracting a negative, you can still go plus plus. But guess what? That plus plus thing is doing exactly what I just said to do. You took the negative, instead of subtracting, you are now adding the opposite. That's exactly what you're doing. So, in the first one, it's pretty easy because you go plus plus, but on B, we can't do that. First of all, let's finish this. If I have negative 7 plus a positive 8, would I expect that answer to be positive or negative? It's going to be positive. One of the numbers is positive, one is negative, so what do I do with the two numbers? Subtract them. 8 minus 7 is? That's a positive 1. So again, if this is an area you struggled, we're going to clear that up right now. We're going to go to the second one. I absolutely hate subtraction. That's negative 7 minus 8. So I'm going to write, instead of that, I'm going to do negative 7, and I'm going to add the opposite of 8, which is what? This is totally easier to me. I'm taking a negative 7 plus a negative 8. Would that answer be positive or negative? It's going to be negative. They're both negative, so what do I do with the two numbers? I add them together. 7 and 8 is 15. That's negative 15. Yep.
So I just trying to figure it out. So if you know the number's going to be like negative, you know to add.
So what tells me to add the two numbers together is because they were both negative. If they were both positive, I would still add them together. The only time I'm going to do that subtraction thing is if one of the numbers is positive and one of the numbers is negative. So when two things are different from each other, I'm going to do subtraction. When two things are the same as each other, I'm going to do addition. So letter C, again, if you are just used to going plus plus, I'm not going to count that against you. I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to do things. But if you were like, I need something that's going to work 100% of the time, well, I know that 7, I'm going to change the subtraction to addition, and I'm going to add, remember that was a negative 8, I'm going to add the opposite of negative 8, which is a positive 8. And 7 plus 8 is? Which is exactly what you would have gotten here too. No different. You just need to know that if you can turn it to addition, you don't need to learn a whole another set of rules. Now we've got 7 minus 8. You may be able to do that, but I'm just going to use my method. Instead of doing subtraction, I'm going to add. Instead of subtraction, I change it to adding, but I need to add the opposite of 8, and the opposite of 8 is? Now these two things are different. One's positive, one's negative. So what will I do with those two numbers? I'm going to subtract them, and will the answer be positive or negative? It's going to be negative. So what is 8 minus 7? Negative 1. We knew it was going to be negative, and 8 minus 7 is 1. So it pulls it all together there. I can tell you right now, this is going to be a huge part. This is going to be the part that if you can ace this, this will make the difference between how you do on the quiz, because this is the part that people struggle with. So I don't want you to feel weird about it if you do struggle with it, because I'm literally telling you that's how I bank in my off time, is by teaching this all day long. You guys get it, I don't want to say for free, you pay to go to school here, but you're not paying anything extra for it. You're right here, you get this lesson right here. That's what I'm saying, is this is the lesson that everybody is like, oh, really? That's how I do those? Because if you just have simple ways, no problem. All right, so let's try this one. It's addition and subtraction, so I'm always going to go left to right. Now we have two options. 10 minus 8, I feel like we don't need to mess with that too much. Are we all okay that with 10 minus 8? Okay, 10 minus 8 is what? Okay, 2 minus 15 plus 6. Now 2 minus 15 may or may not give you troubles, because some people don't like going into that negative range there, so we're like, ugh, what do I do with that? 2 minus 15. Well, let's just turn this into an addition problem. If it's ugly and you don't like it, turn it to an addition problem. 2, instead of writing negative 15 here, what am I going to write? Plus a negative 15. Oh, sorry, not 13. Sorry. Negative 15. I'm adding the opposite. Now, I've got 2, a positive 2, and a negative 15. Is that answer going to be positive or negative? Negative. It's going to end up being negative. And what am I going to do with the 2 and the 15? Subtract them. 15 minus 2? 13 plus 6. Now I'm down to negative 13 plus 6. One's positive, one's negative. Is the answer going to end up being positive or negative? It's negative, because I have more on the negative side than I do on the positive side. So we've got a negative. And now what do I do with the 13 and the 6? Subtract them and I get? Beautiful. Anybody feeling better off than they were on this lesson beforehand? Like anybody's like, okay, I got that. That's what I really want. Honestly, I feel like if you were something like, I hated this forever, and this is less hatred, you don't have to love it, just hate it less. That's all I want. Okay. So now we get to the distributive property, and this is nothing new. It's something you've already done here, but there's one part that kind of confused people. So let's say that I had something like this. Now we're just using letters because we could be any sort of thing. These could be numbers, these could be fractions, these could be letters. This just means that we are going to distribute A times B and A times C. So what that means is A times B gives me AB. We're going to keep that minus there, and A times C is AC. Now, the one part that gets people, and this part gets them all the time, when you see those parentheses and a number right next to it, we are going to multiply each of them like AB minus AC, but this one always gets people. For some reason, when I write it like this, they're like, ugh, what does that mean? It's the same thing. There are two things right next to each other. That means there's no plus in between there. There's no minus in between there. So what it means is that I am going to distribute. So I'm going to go and I can write this as either AB. So I'm going to write this the exact opposite of what it says. A times B is AB or BA. You could have done it written it either way. And then A times C is AC or CA, either way. Because I could have looked at it like this. I could have gone B times A gives me BA, and then C times A gives me CA. It just means that thing on the outside will be multiplied with each of the things on the inside of that parentheses. Each of those things. All right, so let's try this one. This usually gets people too, because you go, man, I got letters, I got numbers, what do I do with all this? So it means that this thing on the outside must be multiplied with each of the things on the inside. Anybody want to give me a shot? What? Sorry? Okay. 12x to the second power. Why didn't that become 12 3x squared? Like, why not this? Yeah, they're together. That's like, you can't separate them like that. And we multiply numbers with numbers and letters with letters, which you did perfectly. 3 times 4 is 12, and then that x squared is still attached with it. What else am I missing here? 3 times 9 is 27, and that was a negative 27 because there was a negative there. So, I'm about to make a huge mistake, and you're about to stop me and correct me. I'm going to make a mistake right here. So I've got a negative 27 and a 12x. So I'm going to combine those. I'm going to go, okay, like that's like a 12x squared. And now I'm going to put those together. Well, it's going to end up negative because I'm adding them together. And then I'm going to go 27 minus 12. That'd be negative 15x squared. So that's my final answer. What did I do wrong?
You can't combine two terms if one has a variable and one doesn't.
This one doesn't have an x squared. It would be like one of them is like 12 apples and the other one is just like 27 is something else. Like they're not the same things. We can't combine them. So this whole step of this negative 15x squared there, we can't do that. That's not possible. We needed to stop right there because there's no more like terms to be combined. Regular numbers can be combined with regular numbers. If we had another x squared, we could combine it with another x squared, but we're only combining the same things. And I point those out, and maybe you're like, I totally know all these things. That's great, because I just want to point it out as a reminder, because most of you didn't go through all of this in geometry as much. You did it in Algebra 1, and then you haven't seen it for a little while. All right, so here we get into an interesting one. Remember, order of operations. So my order of operations tells me to work inside the parentheses first. So what am I going to do in here? What's up? Nothing. There's nothing I can do in there. 6y minus 5, I can't combine those. So where am I going to go next? To the 2. So I don't have any exponents. There's no exponents. But I do have multiplication or division, and my multiplication happens right here. So let's do that. I'm going to put this 4y there because I know I'm not doing that yet. What is 2 times 6y? 12y. And 2 times, if some people like to call it 2 times a negative 5, or some people like to just put the negative and then multiply 2 times 5. So what am I going to get over here? 10. Okay, so now I've got 4y plus 12y minus 10. Final answer. What did I do wrong? Right, I just said if there are things that are like, you could combine them. These two are alike. They're both, I have 4y's and I have 12y's. Well, I can put those together. If I have 4y's and 12y's and I put them together, what do I have? 16y minus 10. Now we're finished. So be careful because it's easy to lose little points for not finishing.